So we got more Naoki Hamaguchi interviews. The man is an absolute beast. He has been doing a tremendous number of interviews, not only to hype Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3, but of course, he also wants to make you aware that Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade is coming to Switch 2. It is coming to Xbox. This one is from Eurogamer, and he says that there's almost no documentation from the original game to reference. This is something that we've known about, basically. Square, during the 90s, did not save anything. As soon as games were made, they threw everything out. And this is really unfortunate, both for the fans and for them. When they went to release Final Fantasy Tactics The Ivalice Chronicles, or they went to go get the code in order to make that remaster, unfortunately, nothing was left. None of the assets, none of the code. They essentially had to reverse engineer the current game, as well as rebuild that game from scratch simultaneously. This is also something they had to do with Kingdom Hearts 1 whenever they were making the HD remix. Square saved nothing. And again, as Master Key points out in chat, this was an ultra common practice, unfortunately, in the 90s, especially in Japan. They just thought, well, we're not going to need that anymore. And so they threw it out. It's just so funny because, you know, when I think about gamers, I think about collectibles, I think about pack rats, I think about people who never throw anything away, I think about people who still have like their Super Nintendo box in their closet, their PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2 box in their closet, and never throw anything away ever. So Eurogamer asks, before we start here, we were talking a little bit about the creator behind the original game. So let's briefly talk about the original. What's the attitude working on the remake series? In terms of referencing old documents and the like from back in the day, are you looking at stuff thinking about reviving old ideas or just for reference? Or indeed, how much of that stuff even still exists? I know back then material preservation wasn't exactly a priority. Hamaguchi, I mean, you probably expect this knowing as you do about game development back then. We're talking about the mid-90s. There's almost no documentation left over from that period at all, practically none. Game development back then was a lot more Wild West. A lot of material was just not kept. Data management wasn't done to modern standards. There's basically nothing. There are some character design sketches I think we still got, and obviously anything which was published separately. So the Ultimania guides have a few of the original documents in there, but in terms of stuff like, for example, partway through development, written documents, design documents, etc., there's practically nothing to work with. This is crazy. Think about this for a second, right? Because we always talk about like, are they reusing certain ideas that they had back then on this game? I actually think a lot of those ideas, they probably didn't even straight up remember, dude. I know, at least for me, there's no way I still would have a ton of ideas for something I worked on 30 years ago. So I do feel like it is kind of unfortunate when it comes to this remake project, them not being able to pull up exact ideas that were cut that they could bring back to life now, purely because a lot of them were probably lost to time, you know? And if they weren't wrote down, I'm sure that they probably got some capacity. Not by Nomura though. Nomura remembers everything. Every idea he ever had was sacred. In fact, I think he even said that he keeps like a book of all of his ideas and like he has them all saved. I bet he still knows everything, but everybody else and all their ideas probably lost to time. The no saving source code, etc. is why the modern HD ports of the old PS1 games actually have worse pre-rendered backgrounds or somewhat sloppy AI upscaled ones like Chrono Cross. It's especially noticeable with the increased resolution and the higher fidelity 3D assets in these newer releases as well. Yeah, it sucks because it basically means, you know, without AI upscaling, you can never actually create HD versions of those backgrounds. Now that being said, there are really good AI upscale mods that do phenomenal jobs, like Moguri mod, which is a comprehensive AI upscale mod for Final Fantasy IX. But in terms of actually being able to re-render those backgrounds, ultimate quality, it is simply impossible now, unfortunately. Oh, there's more to this statement here. He says, before we started, we were talking about the legendary creators who worked on the original game. Certainly, that that reminded me that there was one very important thing that I remember I made quite a clear decision on when I was given the role of director for the Remake series. That's what I really wanted to avoid here, is basically because I am such a big fan of the game, because of that, what I'm not doing is trying to overwrite the original games with my own fan perspective of it and create a new version of the game, which is essentially a fan fiction of it. Very interesting words here. If there was an amount of that design documentation left over from the original games, that would probably make my job there in avoiding that problem a lot easier, because I could just obviously look through that documentation and go, okay, this is what the original intent was. It's all down here. I'll just try and copy that, and any changes will be based on that. As I said, unfortunately, none of that documentation is around. But what really has helped me, and kind of makes up for that fact, is that a lot of those legendary creators that you mentioned are very much still involved in the project. Obviously, Kitase Yoshinori, FF7 director, Mr. Nomura Tetsuya, FF7 artist, Mr. Toriyama Motomu, FF7 event planner, Mr. Nojima Kazushige, FF7 writer. They're all still involved in the remake projects, and they're available very easily, so I can go back and check things against them. Every time I may be concerned or worried about, okay, is this really what's at the core of Final Fantasy VII? Is this really what the original intent was? How do I change that? Should I change that? I can very easily go and talk to these guys, and they can let me know and give me the outlook from the original creative team perspective. So I think that really does help, actually, because once I know that, okay, we've got a good understanding that's been passed down from the mouths of the original creators. Then we can work out, okay, how can we reimagine it and represent that in a new game presentation for a new audience? I think that is perhaps one of the biggest reasons why it's been such a success, really. So I really am grateful for having them on hand. Even if there's no documentation, we can kind of get it from the horse's mouth. I was under the impression Nojima was making those big changes, although I guess it's not clear how much control Hamaguchi has here. Here is the thing. It gets tossed around a lot who is making what changes, right? Like all the time, constantly, you know, fans are saying, well, actually it was this guy making the changes, or actually it was that guy making the changes. Realistically, we don't know. And all of them have some degree of creative control, and all of them are deeply involved in the project. I kind of stopped thinking in terms of like, this guy is responsible or that guy is responsible. I now just think this is the decision of Creative Studio One. And that's a much better, much more healthy way to think of it than one guy is the problem, or like one guy is like making all of these decisions about, you know, what's going on. And the reason is just because like we literally don't know. I wouldn't say that one person is responsible for all of FF7R's changes, really, because some people will say, oh, it was Nomura, or it was Kitase, it was Nojima, it was Hamaguchi. Not really true. We literally don't know. And all of them were all involved with everything to some degree. And also too, you know, as Hamaguchi mentions here, you know, he's going to his other, you know, fellow creatives who worked on the game, and they're giving him their insight on where things should go. I don't think he's going to speak to, or like, you know, take an idea from somebody who has seniority on him working on the original game and be like, no, your idea is bad, I'm gonna do my idea. I don't think anyone's gonna do that. I can't imagine him doing that, right? Even in terms of like, you know, the idea that they all signed off on it, I think that they're just willing to respect each other's contributions and trust each other's creative instincts. But realistically, Final Fantasy, whenever you read these interviews, it's because they are all so deeply involved. It's so deeply collaborative, which is why some people are like, oh, Nomura is just the character designer. You know, why are they letting, you know, the character designer do this or anything like that? Really, he's always been way more than just a character designer. Nomura is deeply involved with every single Final Fantasy game that Creative Studio One and their lineage has worked on. The very concept of FF8 is him, right? He's the one who literally birthed that idea, you know? And if you look at the credits for the OG FF7, the credits for the original concept, FF7 is Sakaguchi and Nomura. So Nomura was involved with creating the base concept of FF7. Iteration must play a big role in that too, right? Especially with the story. I imagine you guys are adjusting and showing things around the team to make decisions about how far you're going to push something, how much you're going to change. And I know it's not something you guys love, but one of the things about coming out on PC is that you got fans digging and discovering bits left over from earlier versions of the scenes and alike. I'm curious if you can speak to the level of iteration that you have to do on some of these important scenes. I'm thinking especially about the scenes at the climax of Rebirth. What was that process like, going from the initial thought through to the final thing? Of course, there are iterations. The idea of a retake, I suppose, to use film terminology, the idea that we create something and then we feel it's not quite up to scratch, or if it doesn't communicate what we want it to do and then achieve what it's supposed to do in the game, we'll go back and we'll create a new version of that. So obviously, there is a certain level of that in the game. I think in terms of overall and how it fits into the overall design of the game, there are a studio out there where in terms of story development, scripting, and how the basic bones of the story will be, they decide that by iteration, testing lots of versions to work out the best one. But in terms of what kinds of discussion on the storyline overall, my team doesn't actually do many whole team discussions on that. There's a very good reason for that. I think that if you have too many people putting input into these things, it becomes a decision by committee, and it can lose creative vision. I think I prefer having a single artistic vision with a story writer and showing what they want to show. The final authority on that in our case is Mr. Nojima, the story writer. If he wants to express something in the story, if he wants to show something, essentially, we'll be saying, yes, we have to show that. There is a bit of leeway, obviously. He puts down a decision of what he wants to show, and then we try it out. And then we look at the end results and then assess if it's working or not. The feeling that it's not getting across what we had in mind with his original script to elicit the right emotional reaction, we can obviously adjust, try to change it, try different versions, try different approaches until we get to that right version. But in terms of iterating on the story, we try to avoid that to keep one solely creative vision. But yeah, I think maybe part of the reason for that question is because, yeah, we did leave some of the older versions of the script in the game. And I think obviously people picked up on them, and it maybe led to a bit of unnecessary speculation about what could have happened, what it could have been. I think also, yeah, fair enough, you got us, he laughed. I think we need to try harder to keep those out of the game. Why are y'all asking him about this, dog? You shouldn't be asking him about the scripts left in the original game. You need to leave it in there so that he's like, oops, I left it in there again for part 3. So we can have more information. Now he's gonna be like, hey, you guys, make sure you scrub the data so that there is no like leftover shit, so people aren't like, oh, it looks like you changed this and that. Don't ask them about it, bro. Let them leave it in. But anyway, he says, I think in some ways it could be fun if you don't take it too seriously. It gets people's imaginations going. They might think the game could have been this, it could have been that. So if you look at it in that respect, I think it's harmless fun if you're just imagining what it could have been. And I agree. So it is really interesting that the final authority is Nojima for what they want to do with the story. However, they're able to essentially play around with it and adjust it to get the final vision across. It also kind of clears up the fact that, you know, they're just playing the story by ear. They definitely have an endpoint in mind, is that they're adjusting based on how they want to present certain story elements, but they're probably not writing certain story elements around what fans say. I know that this was a point of discourse at one period of time. I think that they have always had a vision in mind for where they want to take Final Fantasy VII Remake. I think that how they presented certain things probably has changed, but I think that the actual meaning and the actual direction determine. So he emphasizes what I was just talking about there with the story. So this is actually a good question. Let's read this. Just to keep on the narrative thread, within the parameters you laid out, led from the top, how much of your narrative in the Remake trilogy is on a preset path? If so, we go back to 2015. All right, it was different that far back since at that stage CyberConnect 2 was involved and the like, but to go back to the start of the Remake project, how did you guys know the shape of things? The cliffhanger at the end of the first game, how Rebirth ends, the grand finale that you're working on now, how much was predetermined and how much is based on fan feedback, figuring out stuff game to game. So this is a really, really, really good question. And this has basically been debated since the start of the project, or at least since people first finished Final Fantasy VII Remake. Again, there's been so much discussion. Are they playing this by ear? Are they really just leaving things open so they can adjust based on how fans react to it? Here's what they say. Hamaguchi says, in terms of the overall plot, how the story was going to go, and the overall themes and direction for the remake, that was all very much down at the beginning when we started the project. Obviously, the details of how specifically that's going to be presented, how that's going to be shown in the game, that wasn't there yet. It was very much a rough outline, a basic plot summary really. And again, one thing we hadn't decided at that stage was where we would cut the 3 parts. The story was all there, but where each game would start and end was still up in the air at that point. It was very much a plot outline. None of the details were in there, and obviously some of the big themes of the gameplay and some of the other scenes were very much able to be changed and tweaked around as we went through working on the series. I think one example is that in Rebirth, we've got this scene where Aerith is singing the theme in the gold saucer. That wasn't in the original planning. That just wasn't in there. Partway through the development of Rebirth, Mr. Kitase actually came up to me and said, well, if we got this theme song, I'd really like to have that as something in the game where they actually sing. He really pushed to have that included, which is why we did it, but wasn't in there at all from the original plan. Okay, absolutely based Kitase, let's go. I have to say that I thought that was probably like my favorite moment in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. When Aerith sings No Promises to Keep, that was a magical moment. Who's to say Kitase doesn't still got it? I think he does. I know some people are very contentious about the Magic Girl stuff, songstresses. I love them. And if you don't love them, fuck off. I love them. I think that they are awesome. That is like my favorite shit. I think we need more moments like that in Final Fantasy overall. I hope that Final Fantasy 17 also features a scene where a girl is singing on stage. I do, because I think that that is like, I think that that shit is awesome, and I want more of that in Final Fantasy, not less. So again, that's like one of the best scenes. So yeah, there's stuff like that that's constantly adjusted through development. So I'm a fan. Yo, okay, this one right here. I'd assume that had to come from Mr. Nomada, given we know he has a taste for musicals. Aw, dog. Okay, this one we gotta read. Yeah, I mean, I can really remember that episode so well because it was quite sudden. It was actually quite late in development, actually. We were just discussing with Mr. Uematsu after he finished the song. It was the first version. A great song, by the way. I think that's part of why Mr. Kitase wanted it in there, because it's such a great song. He came out saying, I want that in the game. That has to be in the game. Do something about that. And we had to all rush to get it made very quickly. That's so funny. I don't think Hamaguchi like fully knows like what the interviewer was talking about there, or the reference to the fact that Nomada apparently, reportedly, allegedly barged in the Square Enix and said that he wanted to make Final Fantasy Versus 13 into a musical. No one knows to like what degree, how serious or how true that was. I always assumed that it was like kind of a joke and that he wasn't actually trying to turn it into a musical randomly. But we also don't know. We just know that that was said, and we never really got to know the context behind it. What about from a gameplay perspective, from my viewpoint, obviously you're reacting and thinking about current trends and stuff like that a little bit more than you are from story or with story from game to game. So Rebirth is quite different from Remake, and I sort of expect the third game will be different again. Have you been thinking about, in the broad overall structure while making these games, how they will feel for someone who inevitably plays them all back to back in years to come? Hamaguchi says, first of all, this is a great question. Thank you. The difference between the story and the actual gameplay experience we went for, that was indeed quite different in terms of we didn't have a plan from the beginning of the first game what kind of gameplay experience we wanted to do for the subsequent games. I think we've done with the gameplay side of it, which you observantly picked up on it with the question, is that there are different trends people prefer, different things people look for. This is 10 years of development or more. There's a lot of things that are going to change in those 10 years, and people may be looking for a slightly different direction on the gameplay for future games in the series. So the way we generally handle that in terms of the timing and when these decisions were made, the first game was planned out and the development was carried out. And just about the time when we finished setting down the map, we roughly knew exactly where we were with the first game in terms of the gameplay experience and where everything would fit together. We had a good idea of what it would look like. That was when we started thinking about, what do we want to change for the second one? What do I want to add? What do I want to expand upon? What completely new experiences do we want to put in there? That's then very much the same for the third game as well. So when we were wrapping up on getting the basic pattern down for Rebirth, and we understood what the gameplay was going to feel like for that, then I started looking at what new experiences, what kind of emotional impact, etc., that we wanted to put there into the third game. Essentially, it was a process of we started thinking about that while we were in the middle of development of the previous game and wrapping up development of that. Obviously, we had the idea of what the current one, which would be then the previous one. What? That's worded so weird. But obviously, we had an idea of what the current one, which would then be the previous one, would look like when we started work on that. The story is planned out far in advance. They know where they're going with the story, but as each game takes shape, that's when the more finite details become, or I should say the more minute details become more concrete, and they know exactly where they want to head. And especially for, making each game its own unique gameplay experience, obviously as they get closer to working on the game, then that's when all that comes to form, right? So I wouldn't imagine that they already had all the gameplay details wrote out for Rebirth while they were working on Remake. And similarly, I wouldn't imagine that while they were working on Rebirth, they already had every single thing in mind for part 3. I know that they're trying to simultaneously plan a lot of these, but I'm sure that as you can imagine, each game takes shape. That's when a lot of the ideas come to fruition, and that's when they start to experiment and realize for sure where they want to head. I really like that they're trying to make each gameplay experience feel new, has helped the games avoid it barely feels different aspect of sequels lately. I really like God of War 2018 and God of War Ragnarok, but I think God of War 2018 and Ragnarok are closer together than, say, Final Fantasy VII Remake and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. I would even go as far as saying that Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom are closer together than Remake and Rebirth in terms of general gameplay structure and how they feel. Remake and Rebirth are actually significantly different experiences compared to most other video game sequels that we see in the modern era. There is actually quite a substantial difference in terms of the gameplay loop that feels different. Combat feels very different between those two games in a very substantial way, right? It does not feel like they've just plugged in more assets into the game, or they made certain things just a little bit better. It does actually feel like a leap in the way that sequels I feel kind of used to. Additionally, I think this is something that we haven't actually seen before in game development. The idea that we got an overall story, and then within that story, we've got a certain portion of that story that's going to become one standalone game in its own right, and then be released before we move on. I don't think anyone's ever made games in this way before. So part of the thinking behind that, and I think maybe that's one reason why we're seeing the series be such a success, is because we felt we really had to have that feeling that the series as a series would evolve and change and become a new and exciting and basically keep people's interest. If we didn't do that, if we tried to make 3 of the same game with a continuing story, I think there would be a lot more fans who would drop out and become bored with it if they didn't have that feeling that it was going to continue in a different direction. It's going to change. It It's going to be exciting. We don't know what to expect. I feel we have really succeeded with this approach in terms of having to make everything different. Well, not everything, but to try and change it and to show evolution in the games. If you look at it specifically in terms of the actual examples from the first game to the second game, in terms of the overall themes of the game, the first one is obviously a story-driven experience, a very good story-driven experience. If the second one was actually the same and was driven in the same way, with the same story-driven approach, then as soon as people play the second game, they would think, well, the third one is going to be a story-driven game as well, and they wouldn't have that feeling of excitement and expectation about what could come next. What you put in there to evolve it, to change it, take it in a different direction, it could have been a lot of different things. What I personally chose, because what I wanted to try that, was decided on a more open world structure to the game. Ultimately, that worked well too. There's this idea that it's basically setting out shop and saying you can expect the game to keep changing, to keep it fresh and to give you new surprises. It's not just going to fall into the same pattern again. I think we've done 1 and 2, Remake and then Rebirth, and that kind of works in our favor because people now know they can expect new and exciting things from the third game, which we are working on right now. I'm so very happy that we did that, and I think that was essential, that philosophy of not just planning it all out and making the same all the way through. I think that was really a key part of our success. Not only is that a fairly new approach, but it has led to some things feeling a bit unfulfilling narratively because it feels so incomplete and they're having to stretch certain things out longer than they may need to be. The greatest strength and the greatest weakness of Final Fantasy VII Re-Trilogy is in fact that it is a trilogy. So in a lot of ways, I feel like things are getting increasingly better with each game, and I do expect, 7R3, the most fun, most ambitious Final Fantasy game maybe ever released from a gameplay standpoint. I have no doubt that they are probably going to achieve that just based on what they've achieved so far. But yes, the unfortunate aspect of that is that it means that a lot of things with the narrative have to change. Because if the game is just 3 games of straight Final Fantasy VII, then, well, at least from the way the developers felt, they thought they would not be able to hold people's interest over the course of a decade with just, oh hey, this is more FF7 exactly as you know it, presented exactly in the same way that it was. Whether that's true or not, I honestly don't know. I think that there is an argument for both. I think that a lot of people are locked in right now just to see where things are going to go with the story. And maybe those people would not be as interested if we knew exactly how the story was going to go. But also too, it means that because the game has to be divided across multiple different parts. It means the story has to be divided across multiple different parts. And dividing it across those different parts means that the pacing of the original game is no longer kept in place. It means that a lot of things have to be done in order to make us think, oh, I didn't see this coming. I wonder where this is going to go, but then also not go so far off the deep end that they can't pull it back and it not be FF7 anymore, or it basically be FF7 2 outright and do all those sorts of things. So they have to have a balancing act. And I do understand how, for many people, that balance can make you feel like nothing is happening. But truthfully, everything that happens in Rebirth, I mean, not everything, but the general overarching story that happens in Rebirth is basically what happens in Final Fantasy VII, from Calm all the way to the death of Aerith, right? Like that's like that's literally what happens. And they added like a ton more stuff. And then there are still some people that will go and play it and feel like, well, not enough happened. That's because, they had to like cut that part of Final Fantasy VII out, and it is kind of a slower narrative part, and it works in the context of FF7 OG, but it can leave that feeling, for some people as its own full video game, right? It doesn't feel like it has like this substantial thing that moves the plot forward. That's why some people might say they feel like, nothing happened. That's just like part of the balancing act of doing this. And, there's probably an argument in there that it probably should have been 2 games then, so that some of this could have been avoided. I don't know if that's necessarily wrong or not, but, so far, so good. I'm excited for the third part and seeing what they're going to do. But obviously for the third part of Final Fantasy VII Remake, part 3 is going to have to hit the ground running because there is so much stuff to cover, both from the original game and all the new stuff that they added. I imagine that part 3's pacing is going to be insane. It needs to like hit the ground running and immediately start going into everything. I don't think that there is a single second to waste in part 3. I think it has to immediately locked in to the story and to begin tying up a lot of these plot threads. It makes me worry that they're going to chop stuff. I don't think that they're going to chop stuff, but I do think that a lot of stuff will probably tie into each other. So I think that if some people felt that Rebirth didn't really have any plot progression, my worry on the other side of that would be people feeling like 7R3 is just non-stop gas, like in possibly a negative way. But I would hope not. But I do think that it should be a fairly like, oh my god, everything is happening at once type game, but I hope that doesn't feel rushed. That's essentially what I'm getting at. I don't want them to feel like that, yeah, as subtext says, I'm less concerned about chopping stuff and I'm more concerned about rushing stuff. Yeah, exactly, subtext. Like, I don't want it to feel like we're going through stuff so fast and it's just such a breakneck speed that things are getting skipped over. That it feels like the opposite of how many people felt with Rebirth, where they didn't feel like enough was happening, that so much starts happening so fast with no room to breathe, that it feels like the resolution for many of these arcs really come to a satisfying conclusion. That would be my concern for 7R3. I don't think that's going to be a problem, but I don't know. Because again, you know, just off the top of my head, we have the Zack stuff, we have the Wutai stuff, we have the Glenn stuff, the weapons, we got also just like the whole, like the rest of like Final Fantasy VII as we know it playing out. There's the Terror in the Sky, there is the worlds. I know it's contentious to talk about the worlds because some people interpret the worlds as a multiverse. Some people are like, the worlds are just like a big pool of dreams in the live stream, and it's not actually like worlds. It's like, whatever the man. That thread has to wrap up. Whatever is going on with Aerith also has to wrap up. The Rip in the Sky, which I guess is also related to the worlds. There's a lot of stuff. Okay, he just goes into porting stuff. Oh, I didn't even know this was in there. Final Fantasy 17. Let's talk about this. We're at the time, but I just wanted to say I could talk to you about design for hours, but I want to finish up about asking about a bit about you, really. You become a very important figure for Square Enix and for Final Fantasy, and therefore to RPGs in Japan in general. But your most famous work at this stage is obviously adapting something which already exists. So I'm curious to know, you're looking down this site on finishing part 3. Do you have things that you want to make from scratch? Originally at this stage, are you thinking about that much? Oh, this is the Final Fantasy 17 question, chat. Hamaguchi says, I'm on guard now because I know these kinds of questions. Nah, bro. Hamaguchi said, I know that clickbait ass Night Sky Prince is gonna make a video about this, bro. You know, all I have to do is just say like, yeah, I'm working on a new game. And then there he goes. Final Fantasy 17 Hamaguchi confirmed. He's like, nah, you know I ain't answering. My guard is up. Bro is trying to parry the question. You can't do this. You can't do this to me, Hamaguchi. FF7 teased. I know. It's my fault. It's not your, he says, I'm on guard now because I know these kinds of questions. It's not your question. It's not your fault. If I answer these in the wrong way, people are going to misinterpret this and it'll go around the world and end up with quite a misunderstanding. The forum thread saying, this is Final Fantasy 17. Yes. He knows. He knows. Hamaguchi laughed. Yeah. So I think looking at the trends in the game industry and what's gone up before until now, very much the core of gaming, what's supported in the industry, what has been the bread and butter has been, you might call them premium games, like high quality, rich experiences. There's various genres of various levels of popularity, things like RPGs, action games, shooting games, but it's generally been those rich single player storytelling styles of games that have been in some ways the core of gaming up till now. So what I really feel is, again, maybe we're talking about the last 5 years, maybe pushing to the last 10 years, although 10 seems a bit long for us. I think one of the big trends that we've seen is a changeover, maybe not a changeover, but certainly an equal rise in the popularity of service-based games. The idea that this isn't a solo play experience, you play on your own, this is more of a collaborative and cooperative experience. A game played with other people where you share that gaming experience. That kind of game and that kind of approach to gaming has really grown in at least 5, maybe 10 years. So yeah, this is not just limited to the next Final Fantasy VII Remake. The last part of the series, I spend a lot of time thinking about what I want to make in the future, what kind of games I'd like to do. I do keep coming back to this idea that I think those kinds of live elements in games, if done right, will be very important in the future. There's a lot of people who are looking for those kinds of things in games. However, having said all that, I think we're also kind of seeing a reverse trend starting up at the moment as well. I do believe that there's a lot of things that kind of live games can do in the way that you communicate with other people in the game. That facilitates the kinds of experience that can be had in that environment. But I think we're starting to see in a lot of regions around the world, people looking, and they're maybe getting a bit fatigued, a bit tired of these kinds of live service model games. And they're maybe looking for more traditional premium games. They want to play something on their own, maybe with a story, not having to worry about dealing with other people. I certainly see this in Europe, in America, also very much in Southeast Asia, in China especially. I think we're starting to see a reverse trend going on here as well. Ultimately, I'm not going to answer the question, so sorry about that. Have a good one, Master Key. I love how bro is like, we're in like 5 paragraphs deep, and he's like, I'm not answering the question. Dog, we're already like paragraphs deep in. Ultimately, I'm not going to answer the question, so sorry about that. There's a lot of things I'm thinking about in terms of where I want to take my creative talents next. I'll have to factor in all that in there and see what comes out on the other end, but for the moment, nothing I can say. Black Lion Card, that's so funny. People like live service games, but they also don't like live service games. That's my answer. Holy shit. Yo, man. Yo, he was like, live service games are the trend now. That's what people are into. But also, people are getting tired of that shit, so I probably won't do it. What? That's awesome. I love that. That's so Kino. Oh, man. What a great response, dude. For a second, like, because, your stomach is clenched, like, right here, right? In this paragraph, you're like, oh, God, no. Is he gonna make slop? Is he gonna do the slop thing? And then he gets down here, and he's like, yeah, but people are getting tired of that shit, so I don't know, man. I mean, FF15 was kind of a service game, right? I mean, there was the DLC, there was the online multiplayer, there was supposed to be a second season of DLC. So I do feel like, to some degree, like the first live service offline Final Fantasy was 15. Or maybe I should say not offline, but the first live service non-MMO Final Fantasy might have been 15. And it was successful. FF15 sold a lot. I think he has a good idea of what he is creating. I've talked at length that essentially I do believe that it is Final Fantasy 17. I don't know that for a fact. But judging on where things currently are, I would say it makes the most sense. I was right in calling that CS3 would be the ones developing Final Fantasy 16 back in the day. And my current bet is that I think CS1 is making Final Fantasy 17.